She was 3 months behind on rent, with 72 hours to leave, until the father who ghosted her showed up at her door. But here's what everyone gets wrong about billionaires playing daddy. The novelty always wears off. Will Julian Cross prove them all wrong? Or will Aveline and baby Calla become just another abandoned chapter in his success story? How is that possible? Julian whispered, his voice barely audible as his mind raced through calculations and possibilities. You never responded to my messages, Aveline replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions in her eyes. I tried to tell you I was pregnant, but your career was too important, wasn't it? Julian had built an empire worth billions, but standing on that community center porch, he realized he was actually bankrupt in everything that counted. 2 years of birthdays, first steps, and bedtime stories gone forever. Could any amount of money buy back the time he'd thrown away? Would this little girl ever call him daddy and mean it? Could Aveline forgive the man who abandoned her when she needed him most? Or would Julian's desperate attempt to become the father he should have been end in rejection? If you've ever faced a moment where everything you thought you knew about your life suddenly changed, you'll understand the ground-shifting revelation Julian is experiencing right now. Stay with me as we discover whether some mistakes are too big to be forgiven. Aveline Pierce stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, the bold red letters blurring as tears threatened to spill. 3 months behind on rent, 72 hours to vacate. The weight of her 11-month-old daughter Calla pressed against her hip, blissfully unaware that their already precarious world was crumbling further. It's okay, baby girl, Aveline whispered, pressing her lips to Calla's soft curls. Mommy will figure something out. I always do. But the hollow promise echoed in the dingy hallway of their apartment building. At 26, Aveline had mastered the art of stretching dollars until they screamed, of working multiple jobs while juggling childcare, of smiling through exhaustion so profound it felt etched into her bones. What she hadn't mastered was making the impossible possible. She peeled the notice from the door with trembling fingers, tucking it into her purse before unlocking the apartment. Inside, bills covered the kitchen counter like fallen autumn leaves, medical expenses from Calla's recent ear infection, the electricity notice threatening disconnection. Student loan payments deferred so many times the interest had ballooned to astronomical figures. Think about a time when you felt the weight of responsibility so heavy it seems to physically press down on your shoulders. That's where Aveline finds herself now, at the breaking point, where pride and necessity wage their final battle. Aveline set Calla in her playpen and sank onto their threadbare couch, allowing herself exactly 2 minutes to cry before she would need to formulate a plan. The tears came hot and fast, but silently she had learned long ago that audible sobs would attract the attention of Rhett Arden, her landlord, whose apartment was directly below hers. Rhett had made it clear from the beginning that he considered single mothers high-risk tenants. He'd only rented to Aveline because the building had been half empty at the time. Now that property values in the area were rising, he seemed almost gleeful about her financial struggles, dropping hints about the young professionals eager to pay double her rent. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss at the diner. Can you cover Serena's shift tonight? She's sick again. Aveline glanced at Calla, who was contentedly stacking plastic rings. Her regular babysitter, Mrs. Gonzalez from downstairs, had already watched Calla twice this week, while Aveline picked up extra shifts. Asking again felt impossible, but so did saying no to the much-needed income. I'll be there, she texted back, already calculating how many hours of sleep she could squeeze in before her morning shift at the coffee shop. As she prepared Calla's dinner, mashed sweet potatoes and applesauce, the cheapest options that still provided nutrition, Aveline's mind raced through potential solutions. She could call her mother, but their relationship had been strained since Aveline had refused to give Calla up for adoption. Her friends were all struggling themselves, barely keeping their own heads above water in the merciless economy. There was one option she hadn't considered, one name she had sworn never to speak again: Julian Cross, Calla's father. The memory of their brief relationship still burned the whirlwind romance with the visiting business consultant, the promises of staying in touch when he returned to his headquarters across the country, the gradual tapering of communication until silence became their only language. When Aveline discovered her pregnancy, she'd sent 3 unanswered messages before pride had stopped her fingers from typing more. Julian Cross had made his choice. He wanted nothing to do with her or the life they had created. Aveline had made peace with that reality, had built her identity around being both mother and father to Calla. Reaching out now, after nearly 2 years of silence, felt like admitting defeat. You know that moment when you stood at a crossroads, where every path forward requires swallowing your pride, where your child's needs must outweigh your own wounded heart? A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Rhett's balding head and perpetual scowl. "Miss Pierce," he called, his voice carrying through the thin door. "I know you're in there. We need to discuss your situation." Aveline took a deep breath, plastered on a neutral expression, and opened the door, just enough to see him. "Mr. Arden, I was just about to call you. I know I'm behind, but I'm picking up extra shifts this week, and—" "Save it," he interrupted, pushing the door wider and stepping into her apartment uninvited. His eyes swept dismissively over the modest furnishings before landing on Calla. "The building's being renovated. All units. I need everyone out by the end of the week." "But the notice says I have 72 hours, Aveline protested. "That's not legal. Tenants are entitled to at least 30 days. "Check your lease?" Rhett smirked. "There's a clause about building improvements. Besides, you're already in breach of contract by not paying your rent. I could have had you out weeks ago." Aveline felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "I'll need to consult a tenant rights organization." Rhett laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Good luck with that. You think you're the first single mom to cry foul? The courts are backed up for months. By the time you get a hearing, this place will be completely remodeled and rented to someone who can actually pay." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, I'm not heartless. I know a place that might take you. It's not as nice as this. But beggars can't be choosers, right?" Aveline's skin crawled at his false concern. She knew exactly what kind of place he was referring to, the rundown complex on the edge of town where he shuttled all the tenants he wanted to get rid of. The same complex that had made headlines last year for black mold and electrical violations. "I'll figure something out," she said firmly, moving toward the door in a clear dismissal. Rhett shrugged. "Suit yourself. But remember, 72 hours. Then your stuff goes to the curb." After he left, Aveline leaned against the door, her heart pounding. Calla whimpered from her playpen, sensing her mother's distress. "It's okay, sweetie," Aveline soothed, lifting her daughter and holding her close. "We're going to be fine." But as she gently rocked Calla, a realization crystallized within her. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Not when her daughter's security was at stake. Later that night, after dropping Calla with Mrs. Gonzalez and before heading to her shift at the diner, Aveline sat in the public library, using their free Wi-Fi to compose an email she never thought she'd send. "Julian, I've debated sending this email for months, but circumstances have forced my hand. I want to be clear that I'm not asking for anything for myself. You have a daughter. Her name is Calla, and she's 11 months old. I've attached a photo so you can see for yourself. She has your eyes. I understand if you want nothing to do with us. You made that clear with your silence when I tried to tell you about my pregnancy. But Calla deserves to know who her father is, and you deserve to know about her existence. If you wish to be part of her life in any capacity, please contact me. If not, I understand, and this will be the last you hear from us. Aveline." Her finger hovered over the send button for a full minute before she finally pressed it, releasing the message into the digital void. She had no expectations of a response. This wasn't about her needs or even her hopes. It was about giving her daughter every possible chance at a better life. As she walked to the diner, Aveline felt a strange lightness. Whatever happened next, she had done what she could for Calla. The rest was out of her hands. Something shifts inside you when you send a message that could change everything. That moment of surrender, when you finally let go of control and allow fate to take its course. Across the country, in a glass-walled office overlooking the San Francisco skyline, Julian Cross stared at his computer screen without seeing it. At 34, he had achieved everything society deemed worthy of admiration. He'd transformed a small tech startup into Cross Innovations, a company valued at over $3 billion. His face had graced the covers of business magazines. His name appeared on lists of eligible bachelors and influential entrepreneurs. And yet, emptiness echoed through the cavernous spaces of his life. "Mr. Cross?" His assistant Arya appeared in the doorway. "The board is waiting in the conference room." Julian nodded, straightening his custom-tailored suit jacket. "I'll be right there." As he gathered his presentation materials, his phone chimed with an email notification. He almost ignored it. Another meeting request. Another investment opportunity. Another charity asking for a donation. But something made him glance at the screen. From Aveline Pierce. Subject: important information regarding Calla Pierce. Julian froze, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. Aveline. A name he had forced himself not to think about for nearly 2 years. A name that still appeared in his dreams, accompanied by what-ifs and might-have-beens. And who was Calla Pierce? "Mr. Cross?" Arya appeared again, concern etching her features. "Is everything all right?" "Reschedule the board meeting," Julian said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "Something urgent has come up." "But Miss Vale has been preparing for weeks," Arya protested. "She's presenting the quarterly projections and the new acquisition strategy. Tell Serena I'll call her personally to explain." Julian replied, already, turning back to his desk. "This can't wait." Alone again, Julian sank into his chair and opened the email with trembling fingers. As he read Aveline's words, the world around him seemed to fade away, narrowing to the photo attached to the message. A chubby-cheeked baby girl, with a gummy smile and startlingly familiar green eyes. His mother's eyes. The family eyes that had skipped a generation until now. A daughter. He had a daughter. We've all felt that moment when your entire perception of yourself and your life suddenly shifts. When the person you thought you were collides with the person you actually are. Memories flooded back Aveline's laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the passionate discussions they'd had about everything from politics to pizza toppings. He remembered promising to call, to visit, to make their relationship work despite the distance. Promises he had broken when the demands of his company had consumed him, when the easier path had been to let their connection fade rather than nurture it across miles and time zones. He remembered seeing her messages about important news and convincing himself it was better not to respond, to make a clean break. He had never imagined the news would be this. Without conscious thought, Julian found himself dialing Aveline's number, still saved in his contacts after all this time. His pulse roared in his ears as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" Her voice, slightly breathless but unmistakably Aveline's, sent a jolt through him. "Aveline," he said, her name feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. "It's Julian. I just saw your email." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and nearly 2 years of absence. "I didn't expect you to call so quickly," she finally said, her tone carefully neutral. "I have a daughter," Julian said, the words still surreal. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" A sharp intake of breath. "I tried, Julian. 3 messages when I found out I was pregnant. You never responded." Shame washed over him as he remembered dismissing those messages, assuming they were attempts to rekindle their relationship. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I should have responded. I'm sorry." Another silence, this one punctuated by a baby's babble in the background. Calla. His daughter. "I want to meet her," Julian said suddenly, certainty crystallizing within him. "And I want to help. Aveline, whatever you need." "We don't need your charity," Aveline replied, a hint of the fierce independence he remembered coloring her voice. "I just thought you should know about her." "It's not charity," Julian insisted. "It's responsibility. Please, Aveline, let me see her." The pause that followed felt endless. Then, softly, "We're being evicted on Friday. I don't know where we're going to go." Julian's grip tightened on his phone. "I'm booking a flight right now. I'll be there tomorrow. We'll figure this out together." After ending the call, Julian sat motionless, the magnitude of the situation washing over him in waves. A daughter, a responsibility he had unknowingly shirked for nearly a year. A woman he had once cared deeply for, now struggling to provide for their child. His office door swung open without a knock, and Serena Vale strode in, her expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. As Chief Operating Officer, Serena had been instrumental in Cross Innovation's meteoric rise, her ruthless efficiency and strategic mind complementing Julian's visionary approach. But her ambition was matched only by her belief that personal entanglements were liabilities in business. "What's going on, Julian?" she demanded. "The entire board is sitting there waiting. We have the Peterson deal to finalize." Julian looked up at her, still dazed from his conversation with Aveline. "I have a daughter." Serena blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Excuse me?" "A baby girl, 11 months old. Her name is Calla." Serena's expression shifted from confusion to calculation in an instant. "And the mother is just now telling you? Sounds like someone saw your latest feature in Forbes and decided to cash in." The accusation snapped Julian out of his daze, anger flaring. "It's not like that. Aveline tried to tell me when she found out she was pregnant. I ignored her messages." "Aveline?" Serena's eyebrows rose. "The consultant from the Meridian Project? The one you had that fling with?" "It wasn't a fling," Julian said automatically, though he wasn't sure what else to call their brief but intense relationship. "And yes, that Aveline." Serena sighed, perching on the edge of his desk. "Look, Julian, I understand this is a shock, but we have responsibilities here. The board meeting, the Peterson acquisition, these things can't just be put on hold because of a personal matter." "A personal matter?" Julian repeated incredulously. "This is my child we're talking about. A child you didn't know existed until 10 minutes ago," Serena pointed out. "I'm not saying don't deal with this. I'm saying deal with it after the board meeting, after the Peterson deal is signed. This company, your company, has to come first." Julian stared at her, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the hollow nature of the success he had pursued so relentlessly. What good was building an empire if he failed at the most fundamental human connections? "The company will survive without me for a few days," he said, standing and gathering his coat. "Arya is rescheduling the board meeting. You can handle Peterson until I get back." Serena's eyes narrowed. "Where exactly are you going?" "To meet my daughter," Julian replied simply. "And to help her mother, who's being evicted in 3 days." "Julian, think about what you're doing," Serena warned. "If word gets out that you abandoned a pregnant woman, that you have a secret child you've never supported, then people will know the truth," Julian interrupted. "That I made a terrible mistake, and I'm trying to make it right." Serena's expression hardened. "The board won't like this. The shareholders won't like this. This kind of personal drama creates instability." "I don't care," Julian said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "For once in my life, I'm going to do what matters, not what looks good on a quarterly report." As he walked out of his office, leaving Serena seething behind him, Julian felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. For years, he had defined himself by his business success, measuring his worth in acquisitions and innovations. Now, in the span of 30 minutes, everything had shifted. There was a child in the world with his eyes, his blood, his responsibility. He had failed her for 11 months. He wouldn't fail her for another day. The moment you realize that what you thought was important pales in comparison to what truly matters, that moment when priorities suddenly realign themselves with crystal clarity. If you believe landlords like Rhett who prey on struggling single parents deserve to be exposed, hit that like button right now. Only slumlords and heartless profiteers would scroll past without showing support. Aveline paced the small living room of her apartment, alternating between regretting her moment of weakness in contacting Julian and feeling relieved that Calla might have a chance at a better life. She had spent the morning frantically cleaning their modest home, suddenly self-conscious about the water stain on the ceiling, the mismatched furniture collected from thrift stores and sidewalk giveaways. Calla watched from her playpen, occasionally babbling mama and offering toys for Aveline's inspection. "What did I do, Callabug?" Aveline murmured, lifting her daughter into her arms. Your daddy is coming, and I don't know if that's the best thing or the worst thing that could happen to us. The buzzer rang, sending Aveline's heart into her throat. She checked her watch, 11:30 a.m., exactly when Julian had said he would arrive. Punctual as ever. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the intercom button. Hello? It's Julian. 2 simple words, and yet they carried the weight of their complicated history. Aveline buzzed him in, then stood frozen by the door. Calla, balanced on her hip. The knock, when it came, was gentle. Aveline opened the door to find Julian Cross standing in her hallway, looking simultaneously familiar and like a stranger. His dark hair was shorter than she remembered, his jawline more defined. The casual clothes he wore, jeans and a simple button-down, probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, but his eyes held the same intensity she remembered. Those eyes now moved from her face to the child in her arms, widening slightly. Aveline, he said softly. Then, with reverence, and this must be Calla. Calla, typically shy with strangers, studied Julian with curious eyes, his eyes before offering a tentative smile. Would you like to come in? Aveline asked, stepping back from the doorway. Julian entered, his gaze sweeping over the apartment in a way that made Aveline's cheeks burn with embarrassment. This was a man who probably owned multiple homes, who stayed in luxury hotels, whose office was likely larger than her entire apartment. She looks like you, Julian said, his attention returning to Calla. But those are definitely my mother's eyes. Would you like to hold her? Aveline offered, surprising herself with the suggestion. Julian nodded, a flash of nervousness crossing his features. Aveline carefully transferred Calla to his arms, showing him how to support her weight. Calla regarded this new person solemnly before reaching up to pat his cheek with a chubby hand. Hello, Calla, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your dad. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, profound in its truth and its implications. Aveline felt tears prick at her eyes and turned away, busying herself with straightening the already neat stack of books on her coffee table. Aveline, Julian said quietly, I'm so sorry. For everything. She faced him again, finding sincerity in his expression. I didn't contact you for apologies, Julian. I know, but you deserve one anyway. He gently bounced Calla, who had begun to fidget. And you deserve more than this situation. Both of you do. We've managed, Aveline said defensively. Until now, Julian countered, nodding toward the eviction notice still sitting on the counter. Let me help, Aveline. Not just with money, but with everything. I want to be Calla's father. Really be her father. Before Aveline could respond, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway, followed by a sharp knock that made Calla startle in Julian's arms. Miss Pierce, open up. We need to discuss your move-out timeline. Aveline's stomach dropped. Rhett, the last person she wanted to deal with. Right now. Just a minute, she called, taking Calla back from Julian. That's my landlord, she explained in a low voice. He's been trying to force me out for months. Julian's expression darkened. Let me talk to him. No. That will only make things worse, Aveline whispered urgently. Please, just... The door swung open before she could finish, Rhett using his master key without warning. He stopped short at the sight of Julian, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. I don't allow unauthorized guests in my units, he said, looking Julian up and down. Especially male guests not on the lease. I'm not a guest, Julian replied coolly. I'm Calla's father. Rhett's expression shifted, a calculating look replacing his initial hostility. Well, well, the plot thickens. He turned to Aveline. Holding out on me, were you? Thought you were a struggling single mom. But you've got a backup plan after all. It's not like that, Aveline began. But Rhett cut her off. Doesn't matter what it's like. You're still 3 months behind, and you're still out by Friday. He smirked at Julian. Unless Daddy Warbucks here wants to cover the back rent, plus the early termination fee, and the cleaning deposit. Julian stepped forward, his posture relaxed but somehow commanding. Mr. Arden. Rhett Arden. I own this building." "Mr. Arden," Julian continued smoothly, "I understand there's an issue with Miss Pierce's tenancy. I'd be happy to discuss it with you privately and professionally. Perhaps we could meet in your office later today?" Rhett seemed momentarily thrown by Julian's calm authority. "Fine, 4 o'clock. But it doesn't change the fact that she's in breach of contract." "We'll see," Julian replied, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. After Rhett left, slamming the door behind him, Aveline released a shaky breath. "You shouldn't have done that. He'll make things even harder now." "Let me worry about Rhett," Julian said. "Right now, I'm more concerned about you and Calla. Have you thought about where you'll go if this doesn't work out?" Aveline shook her head, the reality of their situation crashing back over her. "I've been applying for emergency housing assistance, but the wait lists are months long. Most of my friends are in similar situations, barely making ends meet themselves." Julian hesitated, then said, "I've made a reservation at a hotel nearby, a suite, with plenty of room for both of you, just until we figure out a more permanent solution." Aveline's pride warred with practicality. In less than 48 hours, they would have nowhere to go. Her savings account held exactly $237.42. Not enough for a security deposit on a new apartment, barely enough for a few nights in a cheap motel. "I can't just uproot Calla's life," she said weakly. Julian glanced around the apartment. "What life would that be, Aveline? The one where you're working multiple jobs and can barely keep a roof over your heads? The one where she doesn't know her father?" The harsh truth of his words stung. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," Julian agreed, his voice softening. "Not to you, not to Calla, not even to me, though I deserve it least of all. But we have a chance to make things better, starting now." Calla chose that moment to let out a hungry whimper, reaching for Aveline. Julian handed her back, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Just think about it," he said. "The hotel offer stands. No strings attached. And in the meantime, I'd like to spend the day with both of you, if that's okay. Get to know my daughter. Get to know who you've become." Aveline nodded slowly, the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crack. "I need to feed her first, and then maybe we could go to the park." Julian's smile, the same one that had captivated her 2 years ago, reappeared. "The park sounds perfect. Think about a time when you noticed how the smallest moments can become turning points? How a simple agreement to visit a park might be the first step toward rebuilding something you thought was permanently broken?" At 4 o'clock, while Aveline stayed at the apartment with Calla, Julian met with Rhett in the landlord's cramped office on the building's ground floor. The space was cluttered with papers and property listings, a stark contrast to the minimalist elegance of Julian's own workspace in San Francisco. "So," Rhett began, leaning back in his chair, "you're the baby daddy. Come to rescue the damsel in distress?" Julian kept his expression neutral, though the crude characterization made his jaw clench. "I'm here to resolve a situation that's become unnecessarily adversarial," Rhett snorted. "Big words for a simple problem. She owes rent. She can't pay. She needs to go." "How much does she owe?" Julian asked. Rhett pulled a file from a stack on his desk, making a show of consulting it. 3 months at $1,200, plus late fees, plus the early termination clause. We're looking at about $5,000. Julian knew instantly the figure was inflated, but he nodded as if considering it. And if that amount were paid in full, Miss Pierce would be allowed to stay? A flicker of disappointment crossed Rhett's face. "Well, as I mentioned earlier, the building's being renovated. All tenants need to vacate." "Interesting," Julian said mildly, "because I took the liberty of checking with the city planning department this afternoon. There's no permit on file for renovations to this address." Rhett's expression hardened. "Those things take time. The paperwork's being processed." "I also spoke with several other tenants," Julian continued. "All single mothers, all recently served with similar eviction notices, all told the same story about renovations." "What are you, some kind of lawyer?" Rhett demanded, his face reddening. "No," Julian replied. "I'm a businessman. And what you're doing targeting vulnerable tenants fabricating reasons for eviction, likely so you can raise rent substantially. It's not just unethical. In many cases, it's illegal. Rhett leaned forward, his earlier smugness replaced by barely contained anger. Listen, rich boy, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my building, and I'll run it how I see fit. Your girlfriend signed a lease with clauses that protect me. Try taking me to court by the time you get a hearing, she'll be long gone. Julian maintained his calm demeanor, though inside he was seething at the man's callous disregard for the lives he was disrupting. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Arden. Miss Pierce and her daughter. Our daughter will be vacating the apartment voluntarily, not because you're forcing them out, but because they deserve better than this building and better than you as a landlord. He placed a business card on the desk between them. This is my attorney. He'll be contacting you regarding the security deposit, which I expect to be returned in full. He'll also be looking into your business practices more broadly, particularly as they relate to housing discrimination and tenant rights violations. Rhett snatched up the card, his face mottled with rage. You can't threaten me. Who do you think you are? Julian Cross, he replied simply. CEO of Cross Innovations. And while I typically don't use my position or resources for personal matters, I make exceptions for people who prey on single mothers and children. The color drained from Rhett's face as recognition dawned. Cross, the tech company? The very same, Julian confirmed, standing to leave. Expect my attorney's call. And Mr. Arden, I'd reconsider those renovations if I were you. The kind of scrutiny I can bring to bear tends to make regulatory agencies very, very thorough in their inspections. As Julian walked back to Aveline's apartment, he felt a grim satisfaction. Confronting Rhett had been a small thing, really a flex of the privilege and power he'd accumulated over the years. But it was perhaps the first time he'd used that power for something that truly mattered. When he returned, he found Aveline packing Calla's clothes into a small suitcase, her movements efficient but hesitant. We'll take the hotel room, she said without preamble. Just until I can find something else. And I'll pay you back. Every cent. Julian wanted to argue, to tell her that money was the least of his concerns, but he recognized the importance of her independence. Of course, he said instead. Whatever you're comfortable with. As they prepared to leave, Aveline paused in the doorway, looking back at the small apartment that had been their home for the past year. For all its flaws, the water stain on the ceiling, the temperamental heating, the thin walls that had sheltered them, it had been the only home Calla had ever known. We'll be okay, Julian said softly, reading the emotion in her face. Aveline nodded, squaring her shoulders. We always are. You know that feeling when you had to leave a place that, despite its imperfections, represented safety and familiarity? That bittersweet moment of closing a door on one chapter of your life, not knowing what the next will bring? Comment family first if you believe Serena is wrong for trying to keep a father from his child. Only corporate sharks who value profit over people would stay silent. The next few days passed in a blur of decisions and transitions. The hotel suite Julian had reserved was spacious and elegant, with a separate bedroom for Calla and a kitchenette where Aveline could prepare the simple meals her daughter preferred. After the cramped conditions of their apartment, the space felt almost decadent. Julian had been surprisingly hands-on, eager to learn Calla's routines, to change diapers, and prepare bottles under Aveline's guidance. He had arranged for movers to pack and store their belongings, had hired a lawyer to deal with Rhett, had even found a highly rated pediatrician in San Francisco just in case they decided to relocate. On their third evening in the hotel, after Calla had been put to bed in the suite's second bedroom, Aveline found Julian sitting on the balcony, his phone to his ear, his expression tense. I understand the concerns, Serena, but my decision is final, he was saying. Delegate the Singapore presentation to Nico. I'm not leaving right now. He noticed Aveline and held up a finger, indicating he'd be just a moment. We'll discuss this tomorrow. Good night. He ended the call with a sigh. Problems at work? Aveline asked, settling into the chair beside him. Nothing important, Julian replied, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. Just a difference of opinion about priorities. Your COO doesn't approve of your sudden family leave, Aveline guessed, remembering the name from their conversation earlier. Julian's lips quirked in a humorless smile. Serena believes personal entanglements are distractions from business objectives. She's not wrong. From a purely professional standpoint, I have been distracted. I'm sorry, Aveline said automatically. I never meant to disrupt your life. Don't apologize, Julian said firmly. Meeting Calla, reconnecting with you, it's put everything in perspective. I've been chasing success for so long that I forgot to define what success actually means to me. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights below. Finally, Julian turned to her, his expression serious. I have a proposal, he said, and I want you to hear me out before you respond. Aveline tensed, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. All right. I want you and Calla to come to San Francisco, he said, his gaze steady. I have a guest house on my property, completely separate from the main house, with its own entrance and garden. You would have total privacy and independence. Julian. He held up a hand. Please, let me finish. This isn't about us, Aveline. It's about giving Calla the best possible life. In San Francisco, she could have both parents actively involved in her upbringing. You wouldn't have to work multiple jobs. In fact, you could finish your degree if you wanted to. I know you always dreamed of completing your education. The mention of her abandoned educational aspirations put on hold first for financial reasons, then permanently shelved when Calla arrived struck a chord. And what would be expected of me in return? Julian looked genuinely confused. Nothing. This isn't a transaction, Aveline. It's an opportunity for our daughter to have both parents in her life. And if it doesn't work out, if we clash over parenting styles or boundaries, then we adjust. Julian said simply, we're adults. We can figure it out for Calla's sake. Aveline gazed out at the city she had called home for the past 5 years. It held few fond memories, now mostly struggles, disappointments, and the constant stress of financial insecurity. The thought of starting fresh, of giving Calla opportunities she could never provide alone, was tempting. I need time to think about it, she finally said. Julian nodded. Of course, take all the time you need. Something changes when you're offered a solution that seems perfect on the surface, but makes you question whether you're sacrificing something essential like your independence by accepting it. But as the days passed, the decision crystallized in Aveline's mind. She watched Julian with Calla, his genuine delight in her smallest achievements, his patience when she was fussy, his willingness to learn and adapt to her needs. This wasn't a man looking to ease his conscience with money. This was a father falling in love with his daughter. 1 week after Julian's arrival, Aveline made her decision. We'll come to San Francisco, she told him as they walked through the park, Calla babbling happily in her stroller. But I have conditions. Julian's face lit up before he carefully composed his expression. Name them. I want to work, Aveline said firmly. Not right away. I want to settle Calla first, but eventually. I need my own income, my own purpose beyond motherhood. Absolutely. Julian agreed. My company has an excellent childcare center on site. Or we could arrange for a nanny if you prefer. And there are several universities in the area if you decide to finish your degree. Second, Aveline continued, the guest house arrangement is temporary. Within 6 months, I want my own place. Something I can afford on whatever salary I earn. Not something you pay for. Julian frowned slightly. Aveline, there's no need. There is for me, she interrupted. I need to maintain my independence, Julian. For my own self-respect, and to show Calla that her mother stands on her own 2 feet. After a moment, Julian nodded. I understand, but at least let me help you find something safe and comfortable within your budget when the time comes. And finally, Aveline said, stopping to face him directly, we need to establish clear boundaries. Co-parenting doesn't mean we're a couple. It doesn't mean you have any say over my personal life, or I over yours. Something flickered in Julian's eyes, disappointment, perhaps, but he nodded again. Agreed. Though I hope we can at least be friends, for Calla's sake. Aveline softened slightly. I think we're already heading in that direction. As they continued their walk, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. It's Serena. Again. I should take this. Aveline nodded, moving a few steps away to give him privacy while still keeping an eye on Calla, who was fascinated by a squirrel darting across their path. "Serena, I told you I'd call you back this afternoon," Julian said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. Even from a distance, Aveline could hear the sharp, rapid-fire voice on the other end of the line. Julian's expression darkened as he listened. "That's completely unacceptable," he finally said. "I don't care what the board thinks about my personal life. My decision stands. No, I won't be back tomorrow, because I'm in the middle of something important here." He glanced at Aveline and Calla, his expression softening. "More important than any business deal." "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." "Handle it, Serena. That's what I pay you for." He ended the call and rejoined Aveline, his jaw tight with tension. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Serena's trying to force my hand. She's telling the board I'm having some kind of midlife crisis, that I'm neglecting my responsibilities." "Are you?" Aveline asked quietly. "Neglecting your responsibilities. I mean, I'm finally attending to the responsibilities that actually matter," Julian replied, his gaze fixed on Calla. "The company will survive without me for a few weeks. And if it can't, then I've built a house of cards, not a sustainable business." Aveline studied him, seeing a different man than the ambitious consultant she'd known 2 years ago. That Julian had been driven, focused exclusively on his career trajectory. This Julian seemed to have discovered something beyond professional success, a sense of purpose rooted in human connection. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're doing the right thing." Julian's smile was grateful, if a bit strained. "That means more than you know. There comes a point when you witness someone transform before your eyes, not just changing their mind, but fundamentally shifting their values in a way that reveals their true character." The transition to San Francisco happened with the efficiency that characterized everything in Julian's life. Within 2 weeks, Aveline and Calla were settled in the guest house, a charming 2-bedroom cottage with large windows and a small garden, separated from the main house by a courtyard and flowering trees. The first days were a whirlwind of adjustments. Calla, adaptable as most toddlers, quickly took to her new surroundings, delighting in the garden and the spacious rooms to explore. Aveline, however, felt adrift in this new reality, no longer struggling for survival, but uncertain of her place in this carefully curated world Julian had built. On their 3rd morning, Aveline was preparing Calla's breakfast when a sharp knock sounded at the door. Opening it, she found herself face to face with a striking woman in an impeccable suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression coolly assessing. "You must be Aveline," the woman said, her tone making it clear this was not a compliment. "I'm Serena Vale, COO of Cross Innovations." Aveline's stomach tightened. "Julian isn't here. He's at the office." "I know exactly where Julian is," Serena replied. "I came to see you." Against her better judgment, Aveline stepped back, allowing Serena to enter. The executive's gaze swept over the cottage, taking in the modest furnishings and Calla's toys scattered across the living room floor. "Charming," she said, in a way that suggested the opposite. Julian always did have a soft spot for rehabilitation projects. Aveline bristled but kept her voice even. "What can I do for you, Miss Vale?" Serena turned, fixing Aveline with a penetrating stare. "You can understand the position you've put us in. Julian is the face of Cross Innovations. His personal choices reflect on the company." "His personal choices are none of your business," Aveline countered. "When those choices affect shareholder value, they become very much my business." Serena moved to the window, looking out at the main house. Julian built something extraordinary, something that impacts millions of lives. And now he's distracted, canceling meetings, delegating critical decisions. "He's getting to know his daughter," Aveline said, her protective instincts flaring. "Surely even you can understand the importance of that." Serena turned, her expression softening into something that might have been sympathy if it reached her eyes. "Of course. Family is important. But so is timing. And right now, Julian's timing couldn't be worse." "What does that mean?" We're in the middle of negotiations that could double the company's value. Negotiations that require Julian's full attention and presence." Serena sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "I'm not suggesting you and the little one disappear. Just, perhaps a bit of distance would be beneficial for everyone." Aveline crossed her arms. "Are you asking me to leave?" "I'm suggesting that Julian's life in San Francisco and his obligations here might be better kept separate for the time being." Serena reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. This might help ease the transition. Aveline stared at the envelope but made no move to take it. "You're trying to buy me off." "I'm offering practical assistance," Serena corrected smoothly. "Enough to secure a comfortable apartment, childcare, perhaps finish that degree you abandoned. All we ask is some discretion and flexibility regarding Julian's schedule in the coming months." "Get out," Aveline said quietly. Serena blinked, clearly not accustomed to such direct rejection. "Excuse me?" "Get out of my house," Aveline repeated, her voice stronger. "And you can tell the board, or whoever sent you, that Calla and I aren't going anywhere. Not unless Julian asks us to leave." Serena's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Julian's infatuation with playing daddy will fade once the novelty wears off. Men like him don't change their fundamental nature." "You don't know the first thing about Julian's nature," Aveline said, moving to open the door. "And you certainly don't know anything about me or my daughter." Serena slipped the envelope back into her purse and moved toward the exit, pausing on the threshold. "Just remember, when this all falls apart, that I tried to make it easier for you." After she left, Aveline sank onto the couch, her hands trembling with anger and a creeping doubt. Was Serena right? Was Julian's interest in fatherhood just a novelty that would wear off? Was she setting herself and Calla up for another heartbreak? She was still sitting there when Julian arrived home early that afternoon, his face lighting up at the sight of Calla playing on her activity mat. "There's my girl," he said, kneeling to kiss the top of Calla's head. He looked up at Aveline, his smile fading as he registered her expression. "What's wrong?" "Your COO paid me a visit this morning," Aveline said, watching his reaction carefully. Julian's face darkened. "Serena came here? To our home?" The possessive hour didn't escape Aveline's notice. "She seemed concerned about your recent distractions." "What exactly did she say?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Aveline hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "She offered me money to create some distance. For the good of the company, of course." Julian's expression shifted from anger to something closer to devastation. "Aveline, I swear I had no idea she would do something like this." "I believe you," Aveline said, surprised to find she meant it. "But it does make me wonder if she has a point. Am I pulling you away from responsibilities that matter?" Julian moved to sit beside her on the couch, careful to leave space between them. Serena sees the world through a very particular lens. Success, to her, is measured in market share and stock prices. I used to see it the same way. And now? He glanced at Calla, who was happily gumming a teething ring. "Now, I understand there are different kinds of success, different kinds of responsibility." He turned back to Aveline, his expression earnest. "I'm not neglecting my company. I'm rebalancing my priorities." Aveline wanted to believe him. More than that, she wanted Calla to have a father who would choose her over business meetings and stock prices. But Serena's warning echoed in her mind. "What if this is just temporary?" she asked quietly. "What if, once the novelty wears off, you realize that being a CEO is more fulfilling than being a dad?" Julian considered her question seriously. "I can't predict the future, Aveline. I can only tell you what I know right now. And right now, nothing in my life has ever felt as right or as important as being Calla's father." He paused, then added softly, "and reconnecting with you." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in Aveline's chest, a feeling she had carefully buried when he disappeared from her life 2 years ago. "I'm going to deal with Serena," Julian continued, his tone hardening. "What she did was completely unacceptable. Be careful. Aveline warned. She seems like a powerful ally to lose. She crossed a line, Julian replied simply. And she needs to understand that some lines can't be uncrossed. Later that evening, after putting Calla to bed, Aveline decided to explore the guest house more thoroughly. Though they'd been living there for several days, the whirlwind of settling in had left little time for investigation. In the second bedroom, which Julian had converted into a nursery before their arrival, she opened the closet to organize Calla's clothes. Behind a stack of diapers, she discovered a collection of parenting books, What to Expect, The Toddler Years, The Whole Brain Child, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. Each was dog-eared and highlighted, with notes in Julian's precise handwriting filling the margins. Tucked between two books was a receipt dated the day after he had received her email before he had even met Calla. The realization hit Aveline like a physical force. Julian hadn't been preparing for fatherhood since their arrival in San Francisco. He had been preparing from the moment he learned of Calla's existence. As she leafed through the books, a folded paper fell out. Opening it, she found a printout of a donation receipt, a substantial contribution to a nonprofit supporting single mothers, made anonymously the same day Julian had first called her. Tears pricked at Aveline's eyes. This wasn't the action of a man treating fatherhood as a novelty or a temporary distraction. This was someone committed to understanding and fulfilling a role he had never expected, but was determined to embrace. Perhaps Serena was wrong about Julian after all. Perhaps people could change their fundamental nature, or perhaps they could finally discover what that nature truly was. We've all experienced discovering evidence that completely changes your perception of someone. A hidden depth that makes you question all your assumptions about who they really are. Subscribe now if you believe everyone deserves a second chance, unlike Rhett, who wants to see Aveline fail. Only those who enjoy seeing struggling parents suffer would refuse to join our community. As autumn painted the city in gold and crimson, Aveline enrolled in online classes to complete her business degree. With Julian's encouragement, she also began volunteering at a nonprofit that supported single mothers using her own experiences to help others navigate the challenges she had faced. Calla thrived in her new environment, growing more verbal and adventurous each day. She toddled between her parents with equal affection, her personality blossoming in the stability of their unconventional family arrangement. Julian had made good on his promise to deal with Serena. While he hadn't shared the details with Aveline, the COO's visits to the main house had ceased, and the tension that had radiated from Julian whenever her name was mentioned had gradually dissipated. One evening in late November, after Calla had been put to bed, Aveline found Julian sitting on the bench in the courtyard between their houses, a glass of wine in hand and another waiting on the table beside him. "Thought you might join me," he said, gesturing to the second glass. "It's a perfect night." Aveline settled beside him, accepting the wine and tilting her head back to admire the rare clear sky above San Francisco. "It is beautiful," she agreed. "How are your classes going?" Julian asked, his shoulder lightly brushing against hers. "Challenging but good," Aveline replied. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoy learning. And the nonprofit work is incredibly fulfilling." "They're lucky to have you," Julian said, his voice warm with admiration. "You've overcome so much, Aveline. You amaze me." She felt a blush rise to her cheeks, grateful for the dim lighting. "I did what I had to do." "No," Julian shook his head. "You did more than that. You thrived under circumstances that would have broken many people. You created a loving home for Calla with almost nothing to work with, while you were building a tech empire," Aveline said lightly, trying to deflect his praise. Julian's expression grew serious. "An empty empire. Do you know what I realized the day I got your email? That all my success meant nothing because I had no one to share it with. No one who cared about me, beyond what I could do for them, or their investments." The vulnerability in his voice touched something in Aveline. "And now? Now I have Calla," he said softly. "And I have our friendship, which means more to me than you might realize." Their eyes met in the gentle darkness, and Aveline felt the careful boundaries she had established begin to waver. Over the past months, she had watched Julian transform from the ambitious young consultant she had once known into a devoted father and a thoughtful friend. The attraction that had initially drawn them together had never fully disappeared, merely been buried beneath layers of hurt and responsibility. "Julian," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. He set his wine glass down and turned to face her fully. "I know we agreed to boundaries, Aveline, and I've respected them. But I need to be honest with you. My feelings for you never went away. If anything, seeing you as a mother, watching your strength and grace, I've fallen even deeper." Aveline's heart raced. "We can't complicate things. Calla needs stability." "Calla has stability," Julian countered gently. "She has two parents who adore her and who respect each other. Would it really be so terrible if those parents also loved each other?" The word love hung in the air between them, weighty with possibility. "I was so hurt when you disappeared from my life," Aveline whispered. "I can't go through that again." Julian reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I was a different person then, selfish, focused only on my ambitions. Becoming a father has changed me. Aveline, you've changed me. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just asking for a chance to see where this might lead." Aveline looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had captivated her 2 years ago, the same eyes that their daughter had inherited, and saw sincerity, hope, and yes, love reflected there. "One step at a time," she said finally, squeezing his hand.
For now, maybe we could try an actual date, without Calla's sippy cups and stuffed animals as chaperones?
Julian's smile illuminated his entire face. "I would like nothing more." Have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of forgiveness, realizing that the very person who once hurt you might be the one who understands you most completely? That sometimes second chances aren't just gifts we give others, but gifts we give ourselves? As they sat together in the peaceful courtyard, Aveline felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her. The walls she had built around her heart-necessary protection during the hardest days of single motherhood were gradually lowering. Not crumbling all at once, but opening just enough to let hope filter through. The next morning, Aveline was preparing Calla's breakfast when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, she would let it go to voicemail, wary of debt collectors and scammers, but something made her answer. "Is this Aveline Pierce?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she. Miss Pierce. My name is Zara Lane. I'm a reporter with the Bay Area Chronicle. I'm working on a story about Rhett Arden and his rental properties. I understand you were recently evicted from one of his buildings?" Aveline's hand tightened on the phone. "How did you get my name?" "Public records," the reporter replied smoothly, "and I've been interviewing several former tenants. Your name came up repeatedly as someone who stood up to Mr. Arden." "I didn't stand up to anyone," Aveline said cautiously. "I left voluntarily." "After he served you with an illegal eviction notice," Zara pressed, "and after your friend confronted him about his business practices." The slight pause before friend made Aveline's stomach clench. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I can help you. Miss Pierce, we've uncovered evidence that Arden has been systematically targeting single mothers and other vulnerable tenants, forcing them out to convert units to luxury rentals. Your story could help expose these practices." Aveline hesitated. The thought of other women facing what she had, the stress, the fear, the instability, made her blood boil. But involving herself in a public exposé could have implications for Calla, for Julian, for the delicate balance they were building. "I need to think about it," she finally said. "Can I call you back?" "Of course," Zara replied. "But I should mention we're also looking into Arden's business partners, including Serena Vale of Cross Innovations." Aveline nearly dropped the phone. "What did you say?" "Property records show that Miss Vale is a silent investor in several of Arden's buildings, including the one you lived in. Interesting coincidence, isn't it? Considering your current arrangement with Julian Cross." The implication was clear. The reporter knew exactly who Aveline was, and who Calla's father was. This wasn't just about Rhett anymore. "I'll call you back," Aveline said firmly, ending the call before the reporter could say more. Her mind raced. Serena and Rhett connected? It seemed impossible, yet it would explain Serena's desperate attempts to separate her from Julian. Not just professional concern for her CEO's focus, but personal financial interest in keeping Aveline struggling and isolated. She needed to tell Julian, but he had left early for an important board meeting, the first he'd attended in person since coming back into their lives. This was his chance to reassert his leadership, to prove to the board that his new family priorities hadn't diminished his business acumen. Interrupting that meeting with this news felt wrong. It could wait until evening. But as the day progressed, Aveline's unease grew. She found herself checking her phone repeatedly, half expecting to see the story already published, their private lives exposed for public consumption. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't wait any longer. "Need to talk to you. Important. Can you call when you have a moment?" She texted Julian. His response came almost immediately. In final hour of board meeting. "Everything okay with Calla?" "She's fine. It's about Serena." And Rhett. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then reappeared. Coming home now. An hour later, Julian arrived at the guest house, his expression tense. "What's going on?" Aveline explained about the reporter's call, watching his face darken as she relayed the connection between Serena and Rhett. "That's why she came here," Julian said. "The pieces falling into place. Not just because she was worried about my focus on the company. She was protecting her investment in Rhett's properties." "If this story breaks," Aveline said quietly, "it won't just expose Rhett and Serena. It will expose us, you, me, Calla, our whole situation." Julian ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "I don't care about that. Let them write what they want about me. But you and Calla deserve privacy. What are we going to do?" Julian was quiet for a moment, thinking. "First, I need to confront Serena. If she's been using company resources or connections for these investments, that's a serious conflict of interest. And Rhett?" A grim smile crossed Julian's face. "I think it's time someone shed some light on his business practices, don't you? Not through a newspaper article that drags our family into it, but through proper channels." "You mean?" "I mean, I'm going to make some calls to the housing authority, tenant rights organizations, and a few friends in the city planning department. Rhett's been operating in the shadows for too long." Aveline felt a surge of admiration for this man who had once seemed so focused on his own success, now channeling that same determination into protecting others. "What about the reporter?" she asked. Julian considered this. "I'll have my PR team contact her. Confirm that yes, we're co-parenting our daughter, and no, we have no further comment on our private family arrangements. As for Serena and Rhett, we'll suggest she follow the money and the property records. That should keep her busy enough to leave us out of the spotlight." His calm, strategic approach reassured Aveline. This was the Julian she remembered, decisive, solution-oriented. But now those qualities were being directed toward protecting their family, not just advancing his career. "Thank you," she said softly. Julian looked surprised. "For what?" "For coming home immediately, for taking this seriously, for putting us first." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "You and Calla are my priority now. Always." The simple declaration, delivered with such certainty, melted another layer of Aveline's protective armor. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, and felt his arms encircle her in a gentle embrace. Whatever came next, reporters, exposés, confrontations, they would face it together. Have you ever felt that moment when someone proves through actions, not just words, that you truly matter to them? When they drop everything to stand by your side against whatever threatens your peace? Hit that like button if you believe love should triumph over manipulation. Serena and her kind only win when good people stay silent. The fallout came swiftly. Within days of Julian's confrontation with Serena, a closed-door meeting that had staff whispering about raised voices and slammed doors, she had resigned from Cross Innovations, citing personal reasons and new opportunities. The Bay Area Chronicle ran its exposé on Rhett's predatory rental practices, including a sidebar about his business connections to prominent tech executives that mentioned Serena by name but, thankfully, kept Aveline and Julian's family out of the spotlight. Housing authorities launched an investigation into Rhett's properties, and several tenant rights organizations began helping his former renters file complaints and seek damages. Through it all, Aveline and Julian's relationship deepened, moving cautiously from friendship to something more intimate. Their first official date dinner at a small, out-of-the-way restaurant where they wouldn't be recognized had been both familiar and new, rediscovering each other as the people they had become. "Do you remember our first date?" Julian asked, as they shared dessert, a decadent chocolate cake that Aveline would have considered an extravagant waste of money in her previous life. She smiled at the memory. "That little Italian place near your office. You spilled red wine on your white shirt and tried to pretend it didn't bother you." "It was my favorite shirt," Julian admitted with a laugh. "But I was trying to impress you." "You did," Aveline said softly. "Not with your shirt or your job or anything else you thought mattered. Just with you, how passionate you were about your ideas. How you listened when I talked about mine." Julian reached across the table to take her hand. "I miss that sometimes the simplicity of who we were then, before I let ambition cloud everything else." "We can't go back," Aveline said. "But maybe we can take the best parts of who we were and bring them into who we are now." As winter settled over San Francisco, their cautious romance blossomed alongside Cala's growing vocabulary and mobility. The guest house, initially a symbol of Aveline's independence, began to feel less like a separate residence and more like an extension of their shared life. Julian spent evenings there, reading bedtime stories to Cala and lingering afterward for quiet conversations with Aveline. Weekends found the three of them exploring the city together, creating new family traditions. 6 months after their move to San Francisco, true to her word, Aveline began searching for her own apartment. Despite their growing closeness, she remained committed to establishing her independence, financial and otherwise. With her business degree nearly complete and a part-time position at the nonprofit where she had been volunteering, Aveline had begun to build a life that wasn't defined solely by motherhood or by her connection to Julian. "I found a place," she told him one evening as they cleaned up after dinner, Cala already asleep in her crib. "It's small but nice, in a good neighborhood with a park nearby, and I can afford it on my salary." Julian paused in drying a plate, his expression carefully neutral. "That's great. When would you move in?" "The lease starts next month," Aveline replied, watching him closely. "It's only 15 minutes from here." Julian nodded, resuming his task with forced casualness. "Cala will adjust quickly, and I can pick her up for our days together." "You're disappointed," Aveline observed. Julian set down the dish towel and turned to face her. "I understand why you need this. I respect it even. But yes, I've gotten used to having you both here. To seeing Cala every morning, to knowing you're just across the courtyard." The admission touched Aveline deeply. "This isn't about creating distance between us," she said softly. "It's about making sure I'm choosing you, choosing us, from a place of strength, not necessity." Julian moved closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. "I know, and it's one of the many reasons I love you." The words, spoken so simply and directly, made Aveline's breath catch. They had been circling this declaration for weeks, their actions speaking what their voices had not yet articulated. "I love you too," she whispered, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. "I think I always did, even when I was angry with you." Joy transformed Julian's features as he pulled her closer, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't capture. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Move in if you need to," he murmured. "Find your independence. I'll wait. However long it takes, I'll be here when you're ready to come home." The promise, offered without pressure or expectation, confirmed what Aveline had already begun to suspect, that sometimes true independence meant the freedom to choose connection over isolation, to build a shared life without sacrificing one's identity. "I'll still take the apartment," she said. "I need to prove to myself that I can." "But Julian," she met his gaze, allowing him to see the certainty in her eyes. "I'm already home. Have you ever realized that strength isn't always about standing alone, but sometimes about choosing to stand beside someone who truly sees and values you? That independence and partnership aren't mutually exclusive, but can actually enhance each other when built on the right foundation." Comment: "Love wins." If you believe people like Serena and Rhett, who try to tear families apart for profit, deserve to be exposed. Only those who profit from others' misery would remain silent. 6 months later, Aveline stood in the empty apartment she had just signed a lease for, sunlight streaming through the windows. It was modest but charming, in a safe neighborhood with good schools nearby, and most importantly, she could afford it on her new salary as community outreach coordinator for the nonprofit where she had been volunteering. True to her word, she had insisted on finding her own place once she secured employment, despite Julian's increasingly persuasive arguments that she and Calla should remain in the guest house. Their relationship had blossomed cautiously over the past months, but Aveline remained committed to establishing her independence. The sound of footsteps echoed in the empty space as Julian entered, carrying Calla on his shoulders. At 16 months, their daughter was a bundle of energy and curiosity, her vocabulary expanding daily. "What do you think, princess?" Julian asked, lifting Calla down. "Is this a good home for you and Mommy?" Calla toddled around the empty living room, her laughter bouncing off the bare walls. "Big," she declared, spreading her arms wide. "It's perfect," Aveline said, watching her daughter explore. "Close enough to your house for easy visits, but my own space, just what I wanted." Julian's expression was difficult to read as he surveyed the apartment. "When will you move in?" "Next weekend," Aveline replied. "I don't have much to move, and the furniture I ordered should be delivered by Friday." Julian nodded, his usual enthusiasm noticeably absent. They had discussed this move extensively, had agreed it was the right step for Aveline's independence, but now that it was becoming reality, a tension had developed between them. "Calla will adjust quickly," Aveline said, addressing his unspoken concern. "And you'll still see her just as often. We're only 15 minutes away." "It's not just about Calla," Julian admitted quietly, watching their daughter peer out the window at the street below. "These past 6 months, having you both nearby, it's been the happiest time of my life." Aveline's heart constricted. "Mine too," she confessed. "But I need to know I can stand on my own, Julian. That I'm choosing you because I want to, not because I need to." Julian crossed the room to stand before her, taking both her hands in his. "I understand that, Aveline. I admire it, even if it's driving me crazy." He smiled ruefully. "I just want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, my home is your home. Both of you." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Aveline's eyes. This man who had once walked away from her had become the most steadfast presence in her life, patient with her fears, respectful of her boundaries, devoted to their daughter. "I love you," she said simply. The words she had been holding back for weeks finally finding voice. "I think I always did. Even when I was angry with you." Joy transformed Julian's features. "I love you too, Aveline. More than I ever thought possible." "Mama! Dada! Look!" Calla called, pointing excitedly at a butterfly that had landed on the windowsill. Together they joined their daughter at the window, Julian's arm slipping naturally around Aveline's waist as they crouched beside Calla to admire her discovery. In that moment, standing in an empty apartment filled with possibility, Aveline realized that home wasn't about walls, or furniture, or even independence. Home was wherever the three of them were together, a family created through unexpected circumstances, but bound by something much stronger than obligation or necessity. Love, choice, forgiveness, second chances. "Maybe," Aveline said softly, leaning into Julian's embrace, "we should consider this apartment a temporary step, a place for me to find my footing before." "Before?" Julian prompted, hope evident in his voice. Aveline smiled, watching as Calla pressed her tiny hands against the glass, fascinated by the butterfly's delicate wings. "Before we figure out what forever looks like for our family." Julian's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple. "Forever," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." Outside, the butterfly took flight, soaring upward into the endless blue sky, free, yet certain of its direction. Much like the journey that had brought them here, and the path that stretched before them. Unexpected, challenging, beautiful, and entirely their own. Have you ever experienced that perfect moment of clarity, when you realize that what you've been searching for has been right in front of you all along? When the future suddenly comes into focus with breathtaking certainty? On a crisp autumn evening, almost exactly 2 years after Julian had re-entered their lives, he invited Aveline to dinner at the restaurant, where they had shared their first real date after reuniting.
"What's the occasion?" Aveline asked. Slipping into the dress Julian had sent to her apartment that morning, a simple but elegant design in deep emerald that matched her eyes.
"Do I need an occasion to take the mother of my child to dinner?" Julian replied with a mysterious smile. They left Calla with Julian's trusted housekeeper Lila, who had become like a grandmother to the toddler. Throughout dinner, Aveline noticed Julian seemed unusually nervous, checking his phone frequently and glancing toward the restaurant entrance. "Is everything okay?" she finally asked as their dessert plates were cleared. "You seem distracted." Julian reached across the table to take her hand. "I'm not distracted. I'm just waiting for something." He glanced at his watch. "Actually, it should be here by now." As if on cue, the restaurant door opened, and Aveline turned to see a familiar figure toddle in, wearing a frilly dress and holding Lila's hand. "Calla?" Aveline gasped, rising halfway from her seat. "What's going on?" Julian stood, moving around the table to help her up. "I thought we might need our daughter for this particular moment." Calla ran to them, her face alight with excitement, as if she were part of a wonderful secret. Lila handed Julian a small velvet box with a wink before discreetly stepping back. "Aveline," Julian began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. 2 years ago, you gave me the greatest gift possible when you brought me back into Calla's life. You could have kept her from me. You could have demanded nothing more than financial support. Instead, you opened your heart and allowed me to become a true father to our daughter." Aveline felt tears gathering as she looked between Julian and Calla, who was now bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. "In these 2 years," Julian continued, "I've watched you build a life of independence and purpose. You've shown me what real strength looks like. You've taught me the meaning of forgiveness, and somewhere along the way, I fell completely, irrevocably in love with you, not just as Calla's mother, but as the remarkable woman you are." He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with Calla, and opened the velvet box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. Calla carefully took it, just as they had clearly practiced, and held it up to Aveline with both hands. "Mama, will you marry us?" Calla asked, her pronunciation careful but clear, her green eyes so like her father's wide with hope. Emotion overwhelmed Aveline as she looked at the two people who had become her whole world. Her daughter, who had given her purpose when she had nothing else, and this man, who had returned to their lives, not to claim ownership, but to offer partnership, support, and love. "Yes," she whispered, dropping to her knees to embrace them both. "Yes, I'll marry you, both of you." The restaurant erupted in applause as Julian slipped the ring onto her finger and sealed the moment with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Have you ever witnessed a moment so perfect it feels like the universe itself has conspired to bring it about? When all the struggles and detours of the past suddenly make sense because they led you exactly where you were meant to be? They were married the following spring in the garden between the main house and guest house, where their journey as co-parents had begun. Calla, now nearly 3, served as flower girl, scattering rose petals with gleeful abandon before running to stand between her parents for the ceremony. "Today isn't just about uniting two people," the officiant said, smiling at the unconventional family before him. "It's about celebrating the family that already exists. A family built not through traditional paths, but through choice, forgiveness, and love that transcends circumstance." Aveline, radiant in a simple lace gown, looked at Julian as they exchanged vows. The man before her bore little resemblance to the ambitious consultant who had once walked away. This Julian, her Julian, had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in stock options or company valuations, but in moments of connection, in a child's laughter, in the quiet understanding between two people who had found their way home to each other. "I promise to remember always that our greatest achievement isn't the company I've built or the career you're creating," Julian vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "It's the family we've formed, the love we've cultivated despite every obstacle." Aveline squeezed his hands,
her own vows rising from the deepest part of her heart. I promise to trust in us, in the journey that brought us here, and the path we'll forge together. I promise to remember that even the wrong turns led us to where we were meant to be. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Calla tugged at their hands until they both knelt down to her level. We're a forever family now, she declared with the certainty only a child could possess, throwing her arms around both their necks. We always were, sweetheart, Aveline whispered, meeting Julian's gaze over their daughter's head. We just needed time to realize it. Among the small gathering of guests, Aveline noticed a familiar face, Zara Lane, the reporter who had first connected Serena to Rhett. After the ceremony, Zara approached them, her expression professional but warm. Congratulations to you both, she said. I wanted to thank you personally for the tip about Rhett's business practices. The investigation has led to significant reforms in rental regulations across the Bay Area. We're glad something positive came from the situation, Julian replied, his arm around Aveline's waist. Zara hesitated, then added, I also wanted you to know that Serena Vale is under investigation for financial improprieties related to those property investments. The SEC is involved now. Aveline felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a strange sort of pity for a woman whose ambition had led her so far astray. We wish her well, Aveline said simply, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Serena had tried to separate their family, yes, but in doing so, she had inadvertently strengthened their bond. That's very generous of you, Zara observed. Most people in your position would want revenge. Julian smiled, pulling Calla into his free arm as she ran up to them. We've learned that looking backward only slows you down. We prefer to focus on the future. As Zara walked away, Aveline leaned into her husband's embrace, watching their daughter twirl in her flower girl dress, the embodiment of the joy they had created together. No regrets? Julian murmured against her hair. Not one, Aveline replied, turning to kiss him as Calla giggled and covered her eyes in mock disgust. Every step led us here. Have you ever looked back on the hardest chapters of your life and realized they were necessary to bring you to your greatest joy? That sometimes the longest, most difficult path is the only one that leads to where you truly belong? If you believe corrupt business people like Rhett, who intimidate those trying to make positive change, should be held accountable, subscribe now. Only those who support exploitation would refuse to stand with us. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both miraculous and ordinary. They chose to make Julian's house their primary home, but kept the apartment as Aveline's office space, a place where she could develop her nonprofit work and, eventually, launch her own consulting firm focused on helping businesses create family-friendly policies. Julian restructured cross-innovations to prioritize work-life balance, implementing policies inspired by Aveline's experiences as a working mother. Together, they established a foundation dedicated to supporting single parents pursuing education and career advancement. When Calla turned 4, she asked the question they had been anticipating. Can I have a baby brother or sister? 9 months later, twin boys, Cruz and Nico, joined their family, completing the circle that had begun with one unexpected email and a father's determination to make amends. On the twins' first birthday, as family and friends gathered in their home to celebrate, Aveline found Julian standing quietly in the nursery doorway, watching their son sleep while the party continued downstairs. Penny for your thoughts, she said softly, slipping her arm around his waist. Julian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I was just thinking about how close I came to missing all of this. If you hadn't reached out that day. But I did, Aveline reminded him. And you answered. Best decision I ever made, Julian murmured, followed closely by hiring that consultant who kept arguing with me about user interface design 5 years ago. Aveline laughed softly, remembering their first meeting, how she had challenged his assumptions during a presentation, catching his attention with her insight and confidence. Who would have thought that argumentative consultant and the arrogant CEO would end up here? I think some part of me knew even then, Julian admitted. There was something about you, Aveline, something that made everything else fade into the background when you were in the room. From downstairs came the sound of Calla's laughter, followed by calls for Mommy and Daddy to come see the trick she had taught their golden retriever, Sonny. We should get back to the party, Aveline said, though she made no move to leave the peaceful cocoon of Julian's embrace. "In a minute," he replied, turning to face her fully. "I just need to say something first." The seriousness in his tone made Aveline search his face with sudden concern. "What is it?" "Thank you," Julian said simply, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "For giving me a second chance, for building this life with me, for our children, for everything." Emotion welled in Aveline's throat as she rose on tiptoes to kiss him, to this man, who had once broken her heart and then returned to piece it back together more completely than she could have imagined possible. "Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be," she whispered against his lips. Another call from Calla interrupted the moment, more insistent this time. Hand in hand, they descended the stairs to rejoin their daughter and their guests, stepping back into the beautiful chaos of the life they had created together. A life that had begun with an eviction notice and a desperate email. A life transformed by forgiveness and second chances. A life built on the understanding that sometimes the longest detours lead to exactly where we're meant to be. As Calla ran to them, her face alight with joy, Aveline exchanged a glance with Julian. A look that contained their whole story. The separation, the reunion, the careful rebuilding of trust, and the love that had ultimately conquered every obstacle. They had started as strangers who became lovers, then strangers again, then co-parents, then friends, and finally, partners in the truest sense of the word. Their path had been neither straight nor easy, but standing in their home, surrounded by the family they had created, Aveline knew with absolute certainty that every step, even the painful ones, had been leading them here. To this moment, to this family, to this love that had been worth every struggle along the way. And as Julian squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the same certainty, Aveline knew that the best chapters of their story were still waiting to be written one day. One choice, one moment of love at a time. Have you ever looked at your life and realized that every wrong turn, every heartbreak, every struggle was actually guiding you towards something more beautiful than you could have imagined? That sometimes the universe has a way of bringing you exactly what you need even when it doesn't look like what you thought you wanted? If this story touched your heart and you believe everyone deserves protection from predators like Rhett and Serena, please hit that subscribe button and join Mr. Sterling's Secrets of Love. Comment, "Justice prevails," if you stand against those who exploit vulnerable families. Remember, only by standing together can we create the world where love and fairness triumph over greed and manipulation. 5 years passed in a blur of milestones and memories. Calla blossomed into a thoughtful 9-year-old with her father's analytical mind and her mother's compassionate heart. The twins, now active 6-year-olds, were as different as siblings could be. Cruz methodical and observant, Nico impulsive and creative, yet inseparable in the way only twins can be. Aveline's consulting firm had grown from a one-woman operation to a respected agency with 15 employees, specializing in helping companies implement family-friendly policies without sacrificing productivity. Her work had been featured in business magazines and had earned her speaking engagements across the country. Julian had gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations at Cross Innovations, appointing a trusted CEO while he remained as chairman of the board. The shift allowed him more time with his family and the freedom to explore new ventures, including a partnership with Aveline's firm to create technology solutions for working parents. Their home had expanded to accommodate their growing family and evolving needs. The guest house where Aveline had first lived now served as her home office, connected to the main house by a covered walkway that the children called the bridge between Mommy's work and home. On a warm Saturday morning in June, Aveline sat on their patio watching Julian teach the twins to ride bicycles without training wheels. Calla, already an accomplished cyclist, offered enthusiastic encouragement from the sidelines. "You've got it, Nico. Just keep pedaling," she called, as her younger brother wobbled down the driveway, Julian jogging alongside with one hand hovering near the bicycle seat. Cruz waited his turn, methodically adjusting his helmet straps, his expression serious. "Dad, I've been observing, and I think if Nico leans less to the left, he'll maintain better balance." Aveline smiled at her eldest son's analysis. At 6, he already approached life like an engineer, breaking problems down into solvable components, so like Julian in his thoughtful precision. Her phone chimed with a message, and she glanced down to see a notification from her assistant. Final contract from Wynn Corp arrived. Need your signature by Monday. Wynn Corporation represented the largest client her firm had ever landed, a multinational company seeking to overhaul its parental leave policies and flexible work arrangements. The contract would secure her company's financial future for years to come. "Mom, did you see?" Nico's excited voice pulled her attention back to the driveway, where he was pedaling independently for the first time, Julian jogging a few feet behind. "I'm doing it." "Amazing, sweetheart," Aveline called, quickly setting her phone aside. This moment, her son's face alight with pride, her husband's expression a mixture of joy and wistfulness as another parenting milestone passed, was worth more than any contract. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Aveline found Julian in his study, reviewing documents on his tablet. She settled onto the leather sofa across from his desk, tucking her feet beneath her. "The twins were so proud of themselves today," she said, smiling at the memory. "Nico told me he's going to ride his bike to college." Julian set his tablet aside, his expression softening. "Cruz informed me that statistically speaking, most professional cyclists begin training between ages 5 and 7, so he's right on schedule if he wants to pursue that career path." They shared a laugh, the kind that comes from deep understanding of the small humans they were raising. "I signed the Wynn contract," Aveline said after a comfortable silence. "It's official. We're implementing the program across all their North American offices." "That's incredible, Ave," Julian said, genuine pride in his voice. "You've built something remarkable." "We both have," she replied, gesturing around them not just at their beautiful home, but at the life they had constructed together. "Sometimes, I can hardly believe how far we've come." Julian rose from his desk and joined her on the sofa, pulling her against his side. "I was thinking about that today. Watching the twins. How different their lives are from what Calla's might have been if we hadn't found our way back to each other." Aveline rested her head on his shoulder, remembering the cramped apartment, the constant financial stress, the bone-deep exhaustion of those early days as a single mother. "They'll never know what that struggle feels like." "Is that a good thing?" Julian asked quietly. "Sometimes I worry we're making life too easy for them, that they won't develop the resilience you had, the drive that shaped both of us." It was a conversation they revisited, often the delicate balance of providing privilege without creating entitlement, of giving their children advantages while ensuring they understood the value of work and perseverance. "I think what matters is that they understand where we came from," Aveline said thoughtfully. "That they know your company started in a garage with second-hand computers, that I once worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over Calla's head, that nothing was handed to either of us." Julian nodded, his fingers absently tracing patterns on her arm. "Speaking of understanding where we came from, I've been thinking about something." "That sounds ominous," Aveline teased, tilting her face up to his. "Not ominous, just significant." Julian hesitated, then continued. "Next month will be 7 years since you sent that email since I learned about Calla." Aveline nodded, the memory still vivid despite the years that had passed. 7 years since you showed up at my door, looking terrified and determined all at once." "I want to take the family back there," Julian said, "to show the children where it all began. The apartment building, the park where we took Calla that first day, the community center where you used to work. I want them to understand our story, all of it, not just the happy ending." Emotion welled in Aveline's throat at the suggestion. She had not returned to her old city since they had moved Calla to San Francisco. The memories there were complicated, filled with both struggle and moments of unexpected joy. "You don't think it would be too difficult for Calla?" she asked. "She was so young when we left, but she might remember some of it." "I think it would be good for her," Julian replied. "To see where she came from, to understand how far we've all traveled, literally and figuratively, and for the twins to learn about the beginning of our family story." Aveline considered the idea, imagining their children walking the streets she had once navigated with a stroller and diaper bag, exhausted but determined. "I think you're right," she said finally. "It's important for them to know the whole story, not just the fairy tale ending." Julian smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Besides, I heard Rhett finally lost that building. It was purchased by a nonprofit that specializes in affordable housing for families. Really? Aveline sat up straighter, surprised by how much this news affected her. How do you know that? I may have made a few calls, Julian admitted with a slight smile, and perhaps directed some of our foundation's resources their way. Aveline shook her head, though she couldn't suppress her own smile. You never stop surprising me, Julian Cross. Good, he replied, pulling her close again. I plan to keep it that way for at least the next 50 years. Have you ever met someone who continually reveals new depths of thoughtfulness and compassion, making you fall in love with them over and over again? Someone who transforms what once caused you pain into something that helps others? The trip was planned for the following month, a week-long journey into their shared past. They flew commercial rather than taking Julian's company jet, a deliberate choice to begin showing the children the contrast between their privileged present and Aveline's more modest beginnings. Why couldn't we take Daddy's airplane? Nico asked as they navigated the crowded terminal, his small hand clutched in Aveline's. Because most people travel this way, Aveline explained gently. And it's good for you to experience how most of the world lives. Calla, old enough to understand the purpose of their journey, had been uncharacteristically quiet during the flight, gazing out the window with a pensive expression that reminded Aveline so much of Julian when he was deep in thought. Are you okay, sweetheart? Aveline asked, as they collected their luggage. Calla nodded slowly. I'm just trying to remember. I have these little pieces in my head like a red slide at a park. And a lady who smelled like cookies, who used to watch me sometimes. But it's all fuzzy. That was Mrs. Gonzalez, from the apartment below ours, Aveline said, surprised by her daughter's fragmented memories. She used to bake Mexican wedding cookies every Sunday and always saved some for you. Calla's face brightened. I remember those. They were covered in powdered sugar, and you always made me wear a bib to eat them because I got so messy. The simple recollection created a lump in Aveline's throat. Even in their hardest times, there had been moments of sweetness, neighbors who had become like family, small traditions that had made their tiny apartment feel like home. Their first stop after settling into their hotel was the apartment building where Aveline and Calla had lived. It looked smaller than Aveline remembered. The brick facade weathered. The small playground beside it updated with new equipment. A sign near the entrance announced, Horizon Housing, affordable homes for families. The logo of the nonprofit Julian had mentioned. We lived on the 3rd floor, Aveline explained, as they stood on the sidewalk looking up. Apartment 3B. It was just 1 bedroom. Calla slept in a crib in my room, until she was almost 2. Cruz frowned, trying to process this information. But where did all our toys go? And where did you work on your computer? We didn't have many toys, Aveline explained gently. And I didn't have a home office. When I needed to work on something, I used the small table in our kitchen. Was it like camping? Nico asked, trying to frame the concept in terms he could understand. Julian knelt beside his youngest son. Not exactly, buddy. Mom and Calla lived very differently than we do now. They had less space and fewer things, but they were very brave and resourceful. Calla had been studying the building intently. I remember the stairs, she said suddenly. They creaked on the 2nd floor, and there was a railing I used to slide my hand along. It was painted green. Aveline blinked back tears, amazed at what her daughter had retained. That's right, Callabug. The super painted it that awful pea green color the month before we moved out. As they stood there, a woman emerged from the building pushing a stroller. She glanced at them curiously, then did a double take. Aveline? Aveline Pierce? She called, her face lighting with recognition. Aveline stared for a moment before her own face broke into a smile. Elena, I can't believe it, you still live here? The woman Elena Rodriguez, who had lived down the hall from Aveline, hurried over, embracing her warmly. Yes, but it's so different now. After that horrible rent was forced out, this nonprofit took over. They renovated everything but kept the rents affordable. I'm on the tenant board now. She looked at Julian with sudden recognition. And you must be Calla's father. I remember when you first came to visit. Her gaze shifted to the twins. And these handsome boys must be. Cruz and Nico? Julian supplied, shaking Elena's hand. It's nice to meet you again, apparently. Elena laughed. We didn't exactly meet. I just saw you in the hallway and nearly fainted when I realized who you were. The famous CEO coming to our building. It was quite the gossip for weeks. She turned back to Aveline. Are you here visiting? I'd love to catch up. We're showing the children where Calla and I used to live, Aveline explained. It's a bit of a family history tour. Elena's expression softened. That's beautiful. You know, a lot of the moms you used to help at the community center still talk about you. The way you'd share your last dollar or stay up all night with someone's sick baby so they wouldn't miss a shift. You were an inspiration to all of us. Aveline felt her cheeks warm at the praise. I just did what anyone would do. No, Elena said firmly. You did what few people would do. And look at you now. She gestured to the happy, healthy children and the obvious success Aveline and Julian embodied. You deserve every bit of happiness. After promising to meet Elena for coffee before they left town, they continued their tour, visiting the diner where Aveline had waited tables, the coffee shop where she had worked morning shifts, and the community center, where she had eventually found more stable employment. At each stop, Aveline shared stories, some that Julian had never heard before, about the daily challenges and small victories of their life before he had re-entered the picture. This is where I used to take my breaks, she explained as they stood behind the diner. Sometimes when it was really busy, I'd only get 5 minutes. I'd come out here and just breathe. Remind myself that I was doing the best I could. Julian's arm slipped around her waist, a silent acknowledgement of the strength it had taken to survive those days. The children listened with varying degrees of comprehension. Their final stop was the park where Aveline had taken Julian and Calla on that first day of reunion. They found the same bench where they had sat awkwardly, watching Calla toddle through the grass, strangers trying to become family. This is where Dad first pushed me on the swings, Calla told her brothers importantly as they raced toward the playground. He was really bad at it. Mom had to show him how. Julian laughed. The memory both humbling and precious. I was terrified. I'd push too hard and you'd fall off. Your mom had to remind me that you weren't made of glass. As the twins joined other children on the playground equipment, Calla lingered behind with her parents, unusually reflective. Was it really hard, Mom? She asked quietly. Before Dad came back? Aveline considered how to answer truthfully while remaining appropriate for a 9-year-old's understanding. It was challenging, she said carefully. I was young and on my own, and I worried a lot about making sure we had enough food, enough money for rent, enough time together despite how much I had to work. Were you mad at Dad for not being there? Julian tensed beside her, but Aveline squeezed his hand reassuringly. They had agreed to be honest with their children, in age-appropriate ways, about their complicated beginning. Sometimes I was, Aveline admitted, but I was also focused on moving forward, on building a good life for us. And when your dad learned about you, he came right away. That took courage. Calla considered this, her expression serious beyond her years. I'm glad he came back, she said finally. And I'm glad you let him. So am I, sweetheart, Aveline replied, her voice thick with emotion. More than you can possibly understand. Later that night, after the children were asleep in their hotel suite, Aveline and Julian stood by the window overlooking the city that had once been her entire world. Thank you for bringing us here, she said softly. It's been more meaningful than I expected. Julian pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. I keep thinking about all the moments I missed Calla's first steps, her first words. All the nights you must have been exhausted but still got up with her when she cried. We can't change the past, Aveline reminded him gently. We can only learn from it. And we have. Julian agreed. Seeing where you lived, hearing more about those years, it makes me even more in awe of you, Avenue, and more grateful that you found the courage to reach out when you did. Aveline turned in his arms to face him. Do you know what I realized today, walking through all those places? That as hard as those times were, they made me who I am. They taught me resilience and determination. They showed me what I'm capable of surviving. They made you the incredible woman I fall more in love with every day, Julian said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And in a strange way, I'm grateful for that time apart, Aveline continued. Not for the struggle, but for what it taught us both. You needed to become the man who was ready to be a father and partner. I needed to discover my own strength. Julian nodded, understanding in his eyes. The long way around. The only way that could have led us here, Aveline agreed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. This man, who had once been her greatest heartbreak and had become her most steadfast joy. Outside their window, the city continued its nighttime rhythm. Unaware of the significance it held for the family, temporarily returned to its streets. A city that had witnessed their separation and their reunion, their struggle and their triumph. A city that had been the beginning of their story, a story they were now sharing with their children, ensuring that the legacy they passed on included not just privilege and opportunity, but understanding of the journey that had made those things possible. Have you ever returned to a place that once represented hardship, only to find that time and perspective have transformed it into something precious, a crucial chapter in the story of who you've become? If this story touched your heart, and you believe everyone deserves protection from predators like Rhett and Serena, please hit that subscribe button and join Mr. Sterling's Secrets of Love. Comment, justice prevails if you stand against those who exploit vulnerable families. Remember, only by standing together can we create the world where love and fairness triumph over greed and manipulation. On their last day in the city, Aveline received a surprising invitation. Elena had arranged for several of the mothers from the old community center to gather for lunch. Women who, like Aveline, had struggled as single parents, supporting each other through the hardest times. You should go, Julian encouraged when she hesitated. I'll take the kids to that children's museum we passed yesterday. Are you sure? It might be awkward. I mean, I'm returning with my billionaire husband and our perfect life, while they're still fighting battles you once fought, Julian finished for her. But Ave, you've never forgotten those battles. Your work, our foundation, everything you do is about making those battles easier for others. They'll see that. Aveline nodded, knowing he was right. Her consulting firm specifically focused on creating workplace policies that supported parents, particularly single mothers. The foundation she and Julian had established provided scholarships, childcare subsidies, and housing assistance to families in need. The lunch was held at a small restaurant near the community center. When Aveline walked in, she was greeted with warm hugs and exclamations of delight from women she had once considered her lifeline. Mariana, who had watched Calla when Aveline had the flu. Tasha, who had shared her food stamps when Aveline's paycheck was delayed. Zara, who had driven Aveline to job interviews when her car broke down. Look at you, Tasha exclaimed, holding Aveline at arm's length. All fancy and successful. Aveline laughed, suddenly self-conscious of her designer jeans and cashmere sweater. Not that fancy. Girl, please, Zara teased. We've seen the magazine articles. Power couple revolutionizing family-friendly business practices. We're so proud of you. As they settled around the table, sharing updates on their lives and children, Aveline was struck by how much had changed and how much remained the same. These women were still fighting daily battles against systems designed to keep them struggling, still sacrificing for their children, still supporting each other with whatever resources they had. I want to thank you all, Aveline said when there was a lull in the conversation. I wouldn't have survived those early days with Calla without you. You taught me what community really means. And now you're paying it forward, Mariana said, squeezing Aveline's hand. Elena told us about your foundation, how you're helping moms like us. It's not enough, Aveline admitted. The system is still stacked against single parents, especially mothers. But you're changing it from the inside, Tasha pointed out. Getting those big corporations to offer flexible schedules, parental leave, childcare subsidies. That's huge, Aveline. As the lunch continued, an idea began to form in Aveline's mind, a way to expand their foundation's impact, to create something more personal and direct than policy consulting or financial grants. When she rejoined Julian and the children at the hotel that evening, her excitement was palpable. I want to start a mentorship program, she announced, as they packed for their return to San Francisco the next day, connecting successful women who've been through single parenthood with those who are in the thick of it now. Not just financial support, but practical guidance,
Emotional support, networking opportunities. Julian smiled, recognizing the passionate spark in his wife's eyes, the same determination that had kept her going through the hardest days of raising Calla alone. "It's brilliant," he said, "and exactly what's missing from most support programs. I already have the perfect name for it," Aveline continued, her eyes bright with purpose. "The long way around. Because sometimes the most difficult path leads to exactly where you're meant to be." Julian pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with love for this woman who had transformed her own struggles into a mission to ease the journey for others. "I'll support you in whatever way you need," he promised. "This is your vision." Calla, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Can I help too, Mom? When I'm older, I mean." Aveline opened her arm, drawing her daughter into their embrace. "Of course you can, sweetheart. In fact, your perspective will be invaluable. You've seen both sides of this journey." As they stood there, a family united by love and purpose, Aveline felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with an eviction notice and a desperate email had expanded to include not just their immediate family, but a growing community of those they could help. The journey home to San Francisco, to the life they had built together, was also a journey forward, toward a future where their shared experiences could light the path for others finding their way through darkness. Have you ever realized that your greatest struggles weren't just obstacles to overcome, but preparation for your life's most meaningful work? That the wisdom gained through hardship was meant to be shared with others facing similar challenges? 1 year later, Aveline stood at a podium in the community center that had once been her lifeline, now renovated and expanded through a grant from the Cross Pierce Foundation. Behind her sat rows of women, some in business attire, others in uniforms or casual clothes, all participants in the first official gathering of the Long Way Around mentorship program. 7 years ago, I stood in this very room, exhausted and terrified, wondering how I would keep a roof over my daughter's head. Aveline began, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. I was working 3 jobs, barely sleeping, and completely overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising a child on my own. She paused, looking out at the faces watching her, some nodding in recognition, others offering encouraging smiles. What saved me wasn't just determination or hard work, though those were certainly necessary. What saved me was community women like many of you, who shared what little they had, who offered child care when I needed to work an extra shift, who reminded me that I wasn't alone. In the back of the room, Julian sat with their 3 children, his expression a mixture of pride and love, as he watched his wife transform her most painful experiences into hope for others. The long way around isn't just about connecting those who have made it with those still on the journey, Aveline continued. It's about recognizing that we're all still on the journey, that we all have something to give and something to learn. It's about creating a network of support that acknowledges the unique challenges single parents face while celebrating their incredible strength. She gestured to the women seated behind her: executives, business owners, doctors, teachers, all of whom had experienced single parenthood at some point in their lives. These mentors aren't here because they have all the answers. They're here because they've asked the same questions you're asking now. How do I advance my career while being present for my child? How do I navigate a system that often feels designed to make me fail? How do I find time for self-care when every minute is already accounted for? Aveline's gaze found Elena in the front row, now the director of tenant services for Horizon Housing and one of the program's first mentors. And these mentees aren't here because they need saving. They're here because they're already saving themselves and their families every single day, and they deserve support on that journey. As Aveline concluded her speech and the formal mentorship matches were announced, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This, even more than her consulting firm or the foundation, was the work she had been meant to do. Using her own story, with all its struggles and triumphs, to create connections that would ripple outward in ways she couldn't even imagine. Later, as they mingled with participants during the reception, Julian appeared at her side, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "You were incredible," he said softly. "I saw at least 3 women wiping away tears during your speech." Aveline smiled, leaning slightly against his solid presence. "I just told the truth. Our truth." "Mom," Calla called, weaving through the crowd with the twins in tow. Miss Elena says I can help with the children's program they're starting. Can I? The children's program, a parallel initiative providing mentorship and enrichment activities for the children of single parents, had been Calla's idea, born from her own memories of loneliness and her desire to help other kids in similar situations. Of course you can, sweetheart, Aveline replied, her heart swelling with pride at her daughter's compassion. As long as it doesn't interfere with school. As Calla darted off to share the news with Elena, Nico tugged at Julian's sleeve. Dad, can we get cake now? You promised. Julian laughed, ruffling his son's hair. So I did. 1 piece each, and then we need to let Mom finish her work here. As her husband led the twins toward the refreshment table, Aveline felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find a young woman, perhaps 22 or 23, holding a sleeping toddler against her shoulder. Mrs. Cross, the woman began nervously. I just wanted to thank you. I've been following your story since that article came out a few years ago about how you went from struggling single mom to successful businesswoman. It gave me hope when I really needed it. Aveline smiled warmly. Please, call me Aveline. And you are? Aria. And this is my daughter Lila. She adjusted the sleeping child slightly. I'm in my last year of nursing school. It's been challenging, to say the least. I can imagine, Aveline said, her tone conveying genuine understanding rather than pity. Were you matched with a mentor today? Aria nodded. Dr. Rodriguez. She raised 2 kids while going through medical school, so she understands the healthcare schedule craziness. She's wonderful. Aveline agreed. One of our first volunteers. Aria hesitated, then added, I know this might sound strange, but would you mind if I contacted you sometime? Not as an official mentor or anything. Just, I have so many questions about balancing career ambitions with being a good mom. Aveline felt a surge of connection with this young woman, seeing echoes of her younger self in Aria's determined eyes and the careful way she held her sleeping child. I'd be honored, she said, pulling out a business card and writing her personal email on the back. And Aria, you're already a good mom. The fact that you're working so hard to build a better future for Lila proves that. Tears welled in the young woman's eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. Have you ever witnessed how a single moment of genuine connection can transform someone's outlook? How the right words at the right time can become a lifeline that pulls someone through their darkest moments. As Aria moved away to join a group of other mentees, Julian returned with the twins, each clutching a small plate of cake. Making new connections? He asked, noticing Aveline's thoughtful expression. Something like that, she replied. Just reminded of how much a little encouragement can mean when you're in the trenches of single parenthood. Julian's arm slipped around her waist. You're changing lives, Avenue. Not just through the foundation's money, but through your willingness to share your story, the struggles, as well as the success. Aveline leaned into his embrace, watching as Calla helped a younger child build a tower of blocks in the corner of the room. Our story, she corrected gently. I couldn't have created any of this without you. You were changing lives long before I came back into the picture, Julian reminded her. But I'm grateful every day that you let me be part of it now. As the event wound down and they prepared to head home, Aveline took a final look around the community center. The place where she had once come seeking emergency assistance, now transformed into a hub of support and empowerment for families like hers had once been. The journey from that desperate young mother to the woman she was today hadn't been easy or straightforward. It had indeed been the long way around. But standing here with her family beside her and a room full of women supporting each other through similar journeys, Aveline knew with absolute certainty that every step had been necessary. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had led her exactly where she needed to be. Not just to her own happiness, but to a place where she could extend a hand to others still finding their way. Have you ever discovered that your greatest purpose wasn't just about overcoming your own challenges, but about using that experience to light the path for others? That sometimes our most painful chapters become our most powerful tools for creating positive change?
10 years after Julian had re-entered their lives, the Cross family gathered in their backyard for Cala's high school graduation party. At 19, she had blossomed into a poised young woman with her mother's compassion and her father's analytical mind. Headed to Stanford in the fall, with plans to study social policy and business, a combination inspired by watching her parents work. The twins, now 16, had grown into tall, lanky teenagers with distinct personalities, but the same green eyes that had first connected Julian to his daughter. Cruz, methodical and thoughtful, had developed a passion for architectural design, while Nico channeled his creative energy into music and theater. As Aveline arranged platters of food on the outdoor tables, she marveled at how quickly the years had passed, how the tiny baby she had once cradled in a cramped apartment was now preparing to leave for college, how the life she had fought so hard to build had expanded in ways she could never have imagined. Need any help? Julian appeared beside her, his hair now threaded with silver at the temples, but his smile still capable of making her heart skip. I think we're all set, Aveline replied, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. Hard to believe she's old enough for this, isn't it? Julian nodded, his gaze finding Cala across the yard, where she was laughing with friends. Harder to believe how close I came to missing all of it. It was a reflection they shared often not with regret, but with profound gratitude for the second chance they had been given. Mom, Dad, Cala called, waving them over. Come meet Professor West. She runs the social entrepreneurship program I want to apply for. As they crossed the lawn to join their daughter, Aveline felt a familiar surge of pride. Cala had grown up understanding both privilege and responsibility, knowing the story of her parents' journey and determined to use her own advantages to create opportunity for others. The Long Way Around mentorship program had expanded to cities across the country, supporting thousands of single parents and their children. Aveline's consulting firm had helped implement family-friendly policies in hundreds of companies, changing workplace culture from the inside out. And Julian had transformed Cross Innovations into a leader in corporate social responsibility, proving that ethical business practices and profitability could go hand in hand. But their greatest achievement walked beside them not just Cala, preparing to forge her own path in the world, but the twins following in her footsteps. All three children raised with an understanding that true success was measured not in wealth or status, but in the lives they touched and the good they created. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the twins had disappeared to their rooms, Aveline found Cala sitting alone on the porch swing, a pensive expression on her face. Everything okay, sweetheart? Aveline asked, settling beside her daughter. Cala nodded, then hesitated. I was just thinking about everything you and Dad have built, the foundation, your company, his work. It's a lot to live up to. Aveline took her daughter's hand. You don't have to live up to anything, Cala. Your path is your own. I know, Cala said. But I want to make a difference too, like you did. Like I'm still doing. Aveline corrected gently. And like you already are, with your volunteer work and the children's program at the Long Way Around. Cala smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. I've been thinking about something. What if, as part of my studies, I developed a program specifically for children who've experienced family reunification? Kids whose parents were separated but found their way back to each other, like you and Dad. Aveline felt a surge of emotion at her daughter's insight. That's a beautiful idea, Cala. Those kids have unique experiences. Cala continued, her passion evident. They've seen both worlds, separation and togetherness. They understand loss and reunion in ways other children don't. Like you did, Aveline said softly. Cala nodded. I don't remember much from before Dad came back, but I remember how it felt when he did like a piece I didn't know was missing, suddenly clicked into place. Other kids deserve support through that transition, whether it happens when they're babies like me or when they're older. Julian appeared in the doorway, catching the end of their conversation. That sounds like an incredible initiative, he said, joining them on the swing. And one that's needed. Family reunification isn't always smooth, even when it's wanted by everyone involved. Would the foundation support something like that? Cala asked, looking between her parents. Maybe as a pilot program to start? The foundation would be honored, Aveline assured her. But more importantly, your father and I would be honored to see you take our story, your story, and transform it into help for others.
That's the greatest legacy we could hope for. As the three of them sat together on the porch swing, the evening settling around them in peaceful twilight, Aveline reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From an eviction notice and a desperate email to this moment of family unity and purpose, a path that had indeed been the long way around, but the only way that could have led them exactly where they were meant to be. A family bound not just by blood or circumstance, but by choice, by forgiveness, by the understanding that sometimes the most difficult roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. And as Julian's arm tightened around her shoulders, as Calla leaned against her other side, Aveline knew with absolute certainty that every step, even the painful ones, had been worth it for this family, for this love, for this legacy that would continue long after they were gone, touching lives they would never know in ways they could never imagine. The long way around had, in the end, been the perfect path home. Have you ever realized that the story of your life isn't just about you, but about all the lives you touch along the way? That sometimes our greatest contribution is passing on not just our successes, but the wisdom gained from our struggles? Epilogue. Full circle. 20 years after that fateful email, Aveline stood at the podium of a gleaming conference center, surveying the crowd gathered for the 20th anniversary celebration of the Long Way Around Foundation. The organization had grown beyond anything she could have imagined, from a small mentorship program in one city to an international network supporting single parents and reunified families across 3 continents. At 46, Aveline had maintained the quiet strength that had carried her through her hardest days, though success and security had softened her edges. Her consulting firm had been acquired by a larger company years ago, allowing her to focus exclusively on the foundation's work. Beside her sat Julian, now in his 50s, but still commanding attention with his presence, his role as the foundation's chairman complementing her position as executive director. 2 decades ago, Aveline began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I was a desperate single mother facing eviction, with $72 in my bank account and a 1-year-old daughter depending on me for everything. I had exhausted every resource, called in every favor, worked until I could barely stand." She paused, her gaze finding familiar faces in the audience. Calla, now 29, and the Foundation's Director of Family Reunification Programs. The twins, 26, and forging their own paths in architecture and music therapy. Elena, who had become one of the Foundation's regional directors. And Aria, that young nursing student from their first mentorship event, now a pediatric nurse practitioner and mentor to countless young mothers. In that moment of desperation, I made a decision that would change everything. I reached out to my daughter's father, a man who didn't even know she existed. Not for myself, but because Calla deserved to know her father, and he deserved to know about her. Julian's eyes met hers across the stage, still filled with the same gratitude and love that had sustained them through 2 decades of partnership. What followed wasn't a fairy tale, Aveline continued. It was messy and complicated and required tremendous work from both of us. But it led to the family we built together, and eventually to this foundation, to all of you in this room today. She gestured to the audience, filled with mentors, mentees, corporate partners, and supporters. In 20 years, the Long Way Around has helped over 50,000 single parents find stability and support. Our family reunification program, started by my daughter Calla, has guided more than 10,000 families through the complex process of reconnection. Our housing initiative has created safe, affordable homes for families in 37 cities. Pride swelled in Aveline's chest as she recited these statistics. Not pride in her own accomplishments, but in the collective impact of a community built on understanding and shared experience. But numbers don't tell the real story, she said, her voice softening. The real story is in the single mother who finished her degree while raising 3 children on her own. It's in the father who learned how to braid his daughter's hair and help with homework after years of absence. It's in the child who grew up knowing that families come in all forms and that love can find its way back even after the longest detours. As Aveline concluded her speech and introduced Calla to present the Foundation's new initiatives, she felt Julian's hand slip into hers beneath the podium.
a gesture of connection they had maintained through countless public appearances, board meetings, and family milestones. "Still proud of me?" she whispered as they took their seats. "More every day," he replied, his voice low and sincere. "Though I'm not sure how that's mathematically possible." Have you ever witnessed how a single act of courage, like sending an email or answering a call, can set in motion a chain of events that transforms not just one life but thousands? How sometimes our most desperate moments become the catalyst for our greatest contributions. Later, as they mingled with guests at the reception, a young man approached them hesitantly. He appeared to be in his early 20s, with a nervous energy that reminded Aveline of Julian when he had first arrived at her apartment door all those years ago. "Mr. and Mrs. Cross?" he began. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you personally. My name is Cruz Parker." Recognition dawned on Aveline's face. "Elena's son? The last time I saw you, you were about 12. Cruz nodded, smiling. "That's right. I'm actually working with the foundation now. Just started in the housing division last month." "That's wonderful," Julian said, shaking the young man's hand. "Elena must be thrilled." "She is," Cruz confirmed. "But I wanted to tell you both your story. What you built together. It shaped my understanding of what's possible. My dad wasn't in the picture when I was growing up, but watching how you created this family, this foundation, it showed me that absence doesn't have to be the end of the story." Emotion welled in Aveline's throat. This was the true legacy they had created, not just programs and buildings, but a shift in perspective for an entire generation of children who had grown up seeing different models of family, different paths to connection. "Have you been in touch with your father?" Julian asked gently. Cruz nodded. "Last year. It's been complicated. But your daughter's program gave me the tools to approach it with realistic expectations. We're building something new, not trying to recover what was lost." "That's exactly the right mindset," Aveline said warmly. "And if you ever need to talk about it, my door is always open." After Cruz moved on to greet other guests, Julian slipped his arm around Aveline's waist. "Full circle," he murmured. "The children we helped are now helping others. The best kind of legacy." Aveline agreed, leaning into his embrace. As the evening wound down, their children joined them for a rare moment of family privacy in the midst of the public celebration. Kala, poised and purposeful in her leadership role. Cruz, thoughtful and observant as always. Nico, whose creative energy had found expression in developing music therapy programs for children of single parents. "Well, Mom," Kala said, her smile reflecting Aveline's own. 20 years. Did you ever imagine this when you sent that email?" Aveline shook her head, emotion making speech momentarily impossible. "Your mother was just trying to survive," Julian answered for her, his voice gentle with understanding. "To give you what you deserved. And look what came of it," Cruz observed, his analytical mind always seeking patterns and connections. "Thousands of lives changed because Mom was brave enough to reach out. And because Dad was wise enough to answer." Nico added, always quick to ensure balance in any narrative. Aveline found her voice at last. "It wasn't wisdom on either of our parts," she said softly. "It was desperation on mine. And what was it for you, Julian? What made you call me back immediately instead of ignoring that email?" Julian considered the question seriously, as he had many times over the years. "Recognition," he finally said. "In that photo of Kala, I saw myself. But more than that, I saw a chance to be better than I had been, to choose connection over isolation." "The long way around," Kala murmured, invoking the phrase that had become their family motto and the foundation's guiding principle. "The only way that could have led us here," Aveline completed, the familiar exchange, a touchstone of their shared journey. Later that night, after returning to the home they had shared for nearly 2 decades, Aveline and Julian stood on their bedroom balcony, looking out at the city lights. Their children had gone their separate ways, Kala to her apartment downtown, the twins to their respective homes, but would return for Sunday dinner, a tradition maintained through college, graduate school, first jobs, and beyond. 20 years, Julian mused, his arms encircling Aveline from behind. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw your email. Other times it feels like I've never known a life without you and the children." Aveline leaned back against his chest, secure in the embrace that had become her sanctuary. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't sent it? Or if you hadn't responded? Sometimes, Julian admitted. But then I look at what we've built, our family. The foundation. The lives we've touched. And I know that somehow we would have found our way to each other. The universe wouldn't have allowed any other outcome. Aveline turned in his arms, studying the face she had loved through youth and middle age, the face she would love into old age and beyond. That's uncharacteristically mystical for a tech CEO, she teased gently. Julian smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way that still made her heart flutter. Former tech CEO, he corrected. Current foundation chairman and full-time husband, father, and grandfather in waiting. The reference to their impending grandparenthood, Kala and her husband were expecting their first child in 3 months, brought a glow to Aveline's face. Another generation, another chapter in the story that had begun with that desperate email. We did good, didn't we? She asked softly. A rare moment of seeking reassurance from the man who had become her partner in all things. We did extraordinary, Julian replied, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held 20 years of shared history and the promise of decades more to come. And we're just getting started. As they stood together under the stars, Aveline reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a poor single mom and a billionaire CEO to partners in purpose, love, and legacy. A journey that had indeed been the long way around, but the only path that could have led them exactly where they were meant to be. Together, home. Complete. Have you ever looked back on your life and realized that what once seemed like your greatest misfortune actually set you on the path to your greatest blessing? That sometimes the universe has a way of bringing the right people into your life at exactly the right moment, even if that moment doesn't look like what you expected? If this story touched your heart and you believe everyone deserves protection from predators like Rhett and Serena, please hit that subscribe button and join Mr. Sterling's Secrets of Love. Comment justice prevails if you stand against those who exploit vulnerable families. Remember, only by standing together can we create the world where love and fairness triumph over greed and manipulation.